All right, appreciate that. So the reason I have these slides from first cutting is I cannot believe that we are in the second half of August almost, and the year just seems to have flown by. However, the elephant in the room needs to be what we're currently dealing with, not just in the United States, statewide as well, and that is the huge drought issue. We can certainly see to the west of us the states that are affected, and I want you to keep that in mind because we're going to talk about alfalfa, not just from Wisconsin standpoint, but a national standpoint. We'll definitely come back and take a look at what's happening in our own state as well. One of the things I was asked to do was to provide an update, and the best way for me to do that was to reach out to my peers. We have multiple regional crops and soils educators, so I asked them a couple questions and they provided some responses to me. We've got Scott Royce up there in the Northwoods, Marinette Lang, Lado Cano Shano, Jerry Clark, Chippewa Dunn Eau Claire, Anastasia Kurth, Juneau Sauk Richland, Jordan Sattler, Grant, Iowa, Lafayette, and Greene, and then myself with Outagamie and Winnebago. So the report from the northeast part of the state is basically that things are moderate and variable as it relates to the alfalfa yields. First crop was average. Later cuttings were significantly drier. Second crop was more variable as they already had dry zones developing up there in the northeast. Shano remained fairly good yet, which shows you how it's doesn't take a tremendous distance for conditions to vary from one county to the other. In Marinette, they possibly aren't going to have a third crop due to insufficient return to the harvesting costs. So that is a situation where folks have been suffering drought for extended periods here are going to have to make a decision about whether it's worth it to take that cutting. How do things look going into the home stretch? Well, the good news is, like many places, there's probably enough alfalfa up in the region. You may have some farm-to-farm sales to redistribute that hay, but the lack of rain is really becoming burdensome as far as corn silage yield and quality potential in Marinette and other portions up there in the northwest portion. So these are photos that Scott sent me. The left is Crivets on July 15th, and the right is Beaver Township on August 2026. And you can clearly see the impact of drought. Now, this does not represent the whole parts of the counties, but I think it's safe to say that we have people who would have been banking on this producing an average corn silage yield, and it's anything but. We're going to move to the west side of the state. Jerry Clark, covering Chippewa, Dunn Eau Claire. Jerry indicated that when it comes to alfalfa, yields were average here, not a lot of potato leaf hopper pressure. Some on third crop who extended the cutting window, but otherwise averaging 1.2 ton per acre so far in those four cut systems. So we should be on target. Spotty rain, a quarter inch, third of an inch rain really limped things along. Irrigators are running through freshly harvested alfalfa fields, and lots of it needed for all crops. So the quality's been excellent as there have been extended windows to get it harvested. So over in Outagamie, Winnebago, we do not see this. We have tiling, we do not have irrigation, but take a look at the difference in these fields and what you have from harvest to just being irrigated and having a good 7 to 10 days there of proper temperatures and precipitation to go with. Jerry sent me this one this morning, and the question is, can you tell the difference in the upper left-hand corner between the irrigated field and the field that's not irrigated? I think a picture is worth 1,000 words, and you can see that there. So from Grant, Greene, Iowa, Lafayette County, Jordan Sattler indicated most of the people in her area are planning to start chopping corn silage in a couple of weeks. They already had a grower chop a load yesterday. It was on sandy ground, pretty burnt up, 66% moisture. So for those really drought-stressed areas, monitoring whole plant moisture is going to be absolutely essential. That's an isolated case, but nonetheless, those places down south are much further along than we are up north, so it is silage season down there, and it might start early. Third crop yield looked decent. Don't have the numbers to back it up quite yet, but it seemed like it took a long time to regrow after that with how dry it is. So fourth crop will possibly be starting this weekend. Last but not least, as far as Anastasia, Juneau, Sauk, and Richland, the Remember, these comments were asked for ahead of time, so when we looked at the drought map, it is worse in her area. A few days ago, a week ago, it was on the edge of D0 drought, but no one is in panic mode. The recent rains kept everything workable, but alfalfa has had about 3 inches of rain total since that third cutting date in July. So some minor hopper burn damage to the crop. First yield was really good at 2 tons of dry matter, and the second and third cuttings were over a ton. So no silage issues to report, and I'll qualify that by saying yet because of conditions possibly changing. And this is important to note as well, and this is why I appreciate input from my peers. Grower contacted her early in the week, and with the last round of rain concerns, the nitrate levels in some sorghum Sudan that he planned to green chop it was on sandy ground, northern Juneau County, and some leaves were already drying up. So nitrate levels may be something that we need to look at, not just in these green chop feeds, but our silage as a whole. So, in order to talk about economics and highlight pricing and stuff, we got to take a look at the macro picture here. So, what I'm showing you here is the United States, and you see Wisconsin in dark blue, Texas in dark blue, California in dark blue. Those are the top three total forage productions in the state. And just like the Packers, Wisconsin is number one. Texas is number two overall forage production. California comes in at number three. When we take a look at this, as far as our silage yields across the United States, other hay, alfalfa, you can see them there, 21.8. Other hay is going to be lower in alfalfa at 2.1, alfalfa 3.4, green chop 7.6, and sorghum Sudan 16.7, or I should say sorghum and or sorghum Sudan. But you can see how that breaks out across the country. For the alfalfa portion of this, we're just going to focus on the blue number and the red number. So the blue number for alfalfa is the total production that we see in that state. And then the next number is going to be the ranking for alfalfa acres. So we're not going to have time to go through all these other ones, and I want to highlight this with alfalfa. So alfalfa total production was up 0.03% in 2025 over 2024. Acreage was no change at basically 14 million acres. And if you do the math of 3.5 tons an acre, that math works out between 14 million acres and 49 million tons of feed. As far as Wisconsin is concerned, right now, this past year, 2025, even though we rank number one in forage, we are number 8 for both production and acreage. And when we take a look at just the other hay and alfalfa, you can see there is more other hay across the entire United States than there is alfalfa. And that shouldn't surprise us because of some of the geography down south and them not being able to use alfalfa in all those situations. So when we take a look at the top alfalfa producing states as far as 2025, you'll notice we've got Iowa, we've got Nebraska, we've got South Dakota, we've got Montana, Idaho. That's one that people are somewhat surprised. But when you look at the dairy industry, that you've also got California in there. So as far as total other hay production, again, as indicated, as we move south, they're going to make use of some other grasses in the mixtures, and so alfalfa isn't going to be the lead one there. Look at this and see how our alfalfa production has basically declined as far as where we're at when we talk about basically in 2005, so 20 years ago, we were looking at 16 million acres of alfalfa, almost 17 million in the entire United States. We are down to just slightly over 10. So while it hasn't been a complete steady decline, you can see we had some bumps 2014, 2015. We are in a downward trend. When we take a look at alfalfa hay and haylage in Wisconsin and what's been harvested, this is a 25-year span here. You can see 2.6 million acres in the year 2000, and we hit a low of half that, 1.3 in 2023, but we've rebounded to 1.5 million acres, but still significantly less than where we were just not too long ago. When we take a look at prices, here you can see just like inflation, alfalfa has been in a general upward trend. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick out that 2016 to 2026 area. Because if you were to take a corn or soybean price chart for that decade there, guess what? it's basically going to be the same curve. When other commodities are high, alfalfa is competing for acreage, which means our price is usually higher. When we take a look at the National Ag Statistics Service for 2026, the first 6 months have been reported. Look at the uptick. This spring, we started lower with alfalfa, but as drought developed in all those alfalfa producing states, you can see what's happened to price, not just in the US, but here in the States. This is a graph from Progressive Forage, and I thought this was important to share just because when we talk about the alfalfa, 151 and higher, that's our peak category, typically with the hay report that Extension puts out. But we do have that premium dairy category, which is 170 to 185, and then we have Supreme, which is 185 and higher. Even though those prices went down because we had record production years in 2024 and 2025 in Wisconsin, and please note these red bars take into account California, Idaho, New York, Texas, and Wisconsin, which are the five largest milk producing states. But see what happens. The price does decrease, but notice that it does not drop below $200. And here's the statement that good hay is always worth something no matter supply. I'm a trust but verify person. I've heard that, known that 27 years I've been listening to it and preaching it. Here are the numbers. Even though we have had two record hay years in Wisconsin in 24, 25, the price hasn't dropped below $200 a ton. Again, focus on high quality hay and you'll always have a market. Here is the Upper Midwest report that Extension and Melissa puts out, and you can see we've been on a general uptrend. It was scary back on March 31st when I saw large squares of 151 for going for 106 a ton. And I told myself there's no way that's going to last. We can't afford to grow and produce hay and market it at that price. And sure enough, other factors come into play as far as drought and other things, and you can see what's happened to our prices there. Here is a concern, and this is a real life example that I was dealing with. I had a farmer call me. They had purchased some second crop alfalfa way past maturity, 111 RFE, 103 RFQ, and you can see what I try to do is take the three most recent prices, but people aren't even taking low quality hay to the auction market. As you can see on July 21st, there was no sale. So what I did is took the August 4th, the July 7th, and I went all the way back to June. And when you go back to June, then people were still willing to pay three digits for our lowest quality hay, not anymore. So we averaged out at 82.67 for 15% moisture. Figured out the price per dry ton at 97.26. There were 64 bales harvested, 710 pounds each. It was at 18% moisture because it was a big square baler. We had 45,440 pounds divided by tons, 22.72 tons at 18%. We do the conversion for dry matter there. 22 tons wet at 18% converts down to 18.6 tons of dry matter. We multiply that price out and we get 1,800 and basically $12 total value of hay. Well, in this case, the farmer had to bale the hay. The farmer had to rake half of it. So the baling was at $10.50 a bale, which was their price. The raking was at $9.50. They did a half. This was a 17-acre field, by the way. So half of the 17 acres, the person who bought the hay did all the cutting at $17 an acre. And so by time you subtract all those costs, we typically say half the value in hay is tied up in making it. Well, look at the expense versus what the worth is. We only have $770.25 left after that example. Now, that was poor quality second crop. We're on the cusp of high quality fourth crop coming off, and people are going to ask, what is it worth? If we go to the top, you can see I used a hay price of $200 just because that's where we've averaged here lately. And I'm using 15% dry matter. If it was stored hay, maybe 13% at the beginning of spring after being stored all winter, but we're using 15% here. We do the conversions. If we have 4 tons harvested on average, 4.5, 5 tons, 5.5, you can see those numbers on the left-hand side. This chart is nice because it tells you in a 4-ton season yield, we should get just under 3/4 ton of dry matter alfalfa, and it would be worth $50 a ton if our harvesting costs were, or 49, $50 a ton if our harvesting costs were 95. If we had a little higher yielding field, 0.81 ton, 67, 0.9, 85, you can read from there, but this gives you an idea where the market will be as we enter fourth cutting here. As far as our alfalfa dry matter, this would mirror basically the chart that Mike Bertram puts together for the WAYP. We've had our ups and downs, and we finished on the positive side. So I'm going to go back basically and show you here's where the top producing alfalfa states are. South Dakota reigns number one in acreage in total production, number one and number one. Idaho is number two in production. Nebraska, number three. California, number four. Montana, number five. And as I mentioned earlier, Wisconsin, number eight. North Dakota, I throw in just because they're number three in acreage, so that's worth noting. However, if we take a look at 2024, look at that. Wisconsin was dark blue. So we were one of those top alfalfa producing states, but we've been edged out here recently. Back in 2024, Idaho was number one. Idaho number one in production. Nebraska number two. South Dakota number three. And look at that. Wisconsin was number six. So those numbers I showed you in those charts and thinking about economics, this all comes into play. I already mentioned the Alfalfa Yield and Persistence Project, and we've got people out there collecting samples right now, so we'll have great data for that. I couldn't resist taking this photo. Someone needs to practice their tractor driving skills, because if it was a drought early in the season, you would not see that much hay left missed out in the field. And the other thing is get that hay off the field within 48 hours if you can, because if you have to go back, you can see the damage that that wheel traffic causes. It's real. I'm not sure which is worse, leaving it there or wrecking it afterwards. Lots of water hemp we're seeing in some of these alfalfa fields. So what I did is I went to a field, grabbed a pure alfalfa sample, grabbed a moderate sample with water hemp and alfalfa. This was second cutting new seeding alfalfa in Outagamie County. And then the third bar, the red one, it was more water hemp by weight than alfalfa. So it was thick. When we take a look at what happens is our dry matter goes down as we add water hemp because it's so succulent. So our moisture increases. You can see going from 26 dry matter down to 15 moisture, meaning 85%, whereas alfalfa straight was about 73, 74% moisture. Crude protein. A light amount of water hemp doesn't knock your protein. We're basically the same there, 17 and 18. But when you get into the heavy, it makes sense. Your protein's going to drop. ADF and NDF, as you had the heavier water hemp, it makes sense your fiber is going to go up. But how many people were aware of this? As you harvest that water hemp, it adds to the NDFD30 fiber digestibility. And you can see that prominently in that heavy stand. Who would have thought that water hemp was that digestible? And because RFQ is based on basically digestibility, you can see when it comes to relative feed value, we'd rather have the pure alfalfa or the slight water hemp, moderate water hemp. But when it comes to RFQ, because of that digestibility advantage, we actually have higher RFQ with the water hemp infested areas. So again, like so many other things, I'm just driving around thinking it's an observation. Here's another one. The agricultural economy as a whole, if it's not broke, we don't fix it. You can see that this is one way to maybe not have tire track damage in our alfalfa fields. I'm not recommending we run equipment till it's bare like that, but that's what's out across the countryside. We need to consider the value of the hay that's lost when we don't store it. Here you can see those round bales obviously stored outdoors as opposed to large squares under a structure. Very important to space those bales out to allow them to breathe. When we take a look at outside round bales, and everybody has a lot of hay for the most part from carryovers, so if they're just round baling and then leaving it out in the field, important to remind them that that outer 6 inches in a 66-inch diameter bale, which would basically be a 5.5-foot diameter, you're losing a third of your dry matter in that feed. And you go another 6 inches, and now you're pushing 60%. So you're losing over half of it. So again, conversations to have. No one has money right now to spend on new storage, but I needed to show you when you look at under roof losses, they're negligible, 2 to 10%. When you make your way down the chart, if you do anything at all to improve your situation, yes, you're in the double digits, but at least it's not as bad as it could be. When you're outside and you're looking at covered on ground, you're up to 46% losses, uncovered on ground up to 61. Hard to make that hay and watch it go to waste in that regard. This just shows the larger the diameter of, or excuse me, the smaller diameter bale. If you have 4 inches bad, you're going to have almost a third of it lost, a quarter lost, and then a fifth of it lost on 4, 5, and 6 foot bales. One thing we always will be number one is the green chop, and more green choppers per capita in Wisconsin than anywhere else. Let's talk about corn silage. Something to note on that left
Kevin, can I
photo.
interrupt you real quick?
Yep.
5 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you. As far as corn silage, that you can notice that last stock was a late emerger, and it's not going to produce the ears that we see on the right hand side here. So total United States corn production, Wisconsin is number one definitively. We don't have to talk about other states. BMR is an issue that it's going away. And here on the left-hand side, you can see a plot with short corn in it. If you look at that center, you can also see the farmer planted 3 different hybrids, 6 rows each as you make your way from the left to the right there from that short row. And you can see a photo in the field. UW has BMR research plots. This is one in Seymour, Wisconsin. Scott Royce has one up in Oconto County, and Dr. Coor has one down in Madison. Problem with corn silage, what we really need to pay attention to is what's going to happen with our disease development here. So you can see in Wisconsin, we have tar spot here. Tar spot identification has been talked about before. There's going to be some links that you can go to that are shared in the chat. As far as tar spot, 60 to 74 degrees is what it's looking for development. Moisture are key drivers. I'm not going to read through all these points because I think that we know the wetter it is, that's going to increase those chances. Yield losses are highly variable. Especially if the disease develops late after R4, R5, yield packs are often minimal, but before that, that R1, R3, we can end up with some significant losses, 10 to 30% or upwards of 50. Here's a great chart with the R stages on that can help you determine if you should treat. R4 is the cutoff. You have to decide 50-50 depending on the amount of pressure that's there. Southern rust, that's a new issue that we're dealing with as well. And you can see we've got that present in Wisconsin counties. Everybody got introduced to this last year. Here you can see the identifying characteristics, and we've got links in the chat to go there. Again, same thing. We're applying those fungicides R1 to R3, and at least in the northern half of the state, we still have corn in those categories. Things you should consider, it's good at protecting uninfected areas, but you really need to consider that stage of development. So we want you to study this chart here and make sure that you're staging that corn directly when it comes to spray decisions. We've got a great table that's put together by the Crop Protection Management Network, and you can see a resource there rating those fungicide products. Here is light southern rust versus heavy at a dry down I did last year. Light on the left, heavy on the right. Here you can see the two plants. Notice on the left-hand plant, it's green all the way down to the stalk. Look at the right plant, side plant. We've got dry all the way up. We had 14 rows of corn on the better looking plant, 12 rows of kernels on the lesser plant. So there's obviously stress at V6, and that probably made it more susceptible to disease. How much does it impact dry down rates? The heavy rust plant was at 63.1. The light rust was 66.6. You may think only 3.5 points of moisture isn't much, but we went from 66, where we have multiple choices of structures to ensile, to 63, where we probably missed our point. Real quickly, we'll talk about crop corn enterprise budget. Basically, if we have 21 tons, we're going to, at $45 a ton, $945. Here we've got accounted for our nitrogen, our P2O5, our potassium, and our total inputs there, $339. We've got our costs for the corn seed in this budget. I'm not going to go through all these individually. We've got spray accounted for there. We've got our land rental cost in there, crop insurance. And when we take a look at harvesting, we've got that accounted, or excuse me, putting the crop in, we've got that accounted for, as well as the harvesting, $225 per acre there. And when we look at storing, bags are accounted for along with labors and other items. And what we see is raising corn silage is not profitable. We're losing about 477 per acre, and we have a break-even cost of 67.76. So what I'm going to say is that we have spreadsheets available from Ryan Sterry, Matt Lippert wrote some articles on pricing corn silage, and those should be available to you in the links and the chats. So it's going to be individual situations here. Here's the sensitivity analysis. Even if we improved our price by 20% and our yield by 20%, which would be that upper right corner of that sensitivity chart, we're still losing $62. So pricing corn silage, I recommend that farmers look at what they have tied up in the crop before assigning a value of what it is when it goes out the door. And so with that, I should be done here. I'm going to stop. Anybody who would like to talk to me can reach me at kevin.jarek at wisc.edu. If we have any questions, I'll try and answer those quickly. I'm going to go ahead and let us transition to the next presenter.